Hey there, welcome back to Pepper Geek. In today's video, I want to talk all about mulching pepper plants. So mulch is essentially anything that covers the surface of your garden soil. It could be any material you want, from newspaper to compost to black plastic. And in this video, I want to talk about the benefits of mulching, some of the best options for mulch materials that you should use, and also some tips for mulching your peppers. So, like I said, mulch is anything that covers the surface of the soil. It's important to make that distinction of it being on the surface and not worked into the soil, because mulch is not a soil amendment. It's really just sort of a blanket over the surface of the soil, creating a barrier between the soil and the above ground leafy growth. There are so many benefits to mulching, especially if you use an organic mulch. The first of which is it retains water in the soil, so that barrier will help prevent evaporation from happening quickly on the surface of the soil and will give your roots a better chance of establishing, especially after they've just been transplanted. The next benefit of mulch is it suppresses weeds. So the bigger your garden is, the more of a benefit this will be to you. You just have to apply your mulch one time and it should suppress weeds for the most part. Mulch also helps regulate soil temperature. So if you're going into the cooler season later in the year, your pepper plants are going to benefit from having a thick mulch layer, which will insulate the roots from any cold temperatures. Mulch will also help protect your soil from erosion. So heavy precipitation is a pretty serious threat to your topsoil. So having a mulch layer on the top will help protect it. In those heavy rainfalls, you may have noticed in the past that soil splashes up onto your plants, and having a nice thick layer of mulch once again will help prevent this problem from happening, and in turn can help reduce disease on your plants. And like I said before, organic mulch will add nutrients to the soil. Those organic materials like straw or grass clippings will break down slowly over time on the surface of the soil and will leach down into the soil below where your roots are growing. And I personally think that mulch looks better than an unmulched garden. Now this is of course subjective, but I think it looks a little bit more clean depending on the mulch that you choose to use, but all of the other benefits add up to make it really worthwhile. So now let's go through some of the best mulch options for pepper plants. I'm going to cover 7 different options, but there are basically infinite options if you have something that will cover the soil and it won't leach chemicals into the soil or otherwise harm your garden, then it can be used as a mulch. So the first is leaf mulch. If you live in an area with deciduous trees, you can collect all of the dried fallen leaves in your area, chop them up with your lawnmower, and use that as a mulch. I love this option because it's free and you can be sure that it hasn't been treated with herbicides or pesticides, which can do serious damage to your plants. You definitely do want to chop them up beforehand, and we actually have a video on Geeky Greenhouse all about the process of making leaf mulch and leaf mold. Like most of the mulches I'm going to be talking about, you want to apply it about 3 inches thick on the surface of the soil. The next great option are pine needles. They're very similar to fallen leaves, but they're actually even easier to apply because you don't have to chop them up, and they take a bit longer to break down than leaves. Some people don't like the way that this looks in the garden, but if you have some pine trees in your yard and you have excess pine needles, they make a great mulch. Next up are lawn clippings. Again, this is another free option. If you're mowing your lawn, you can simply save the clippings, let them dry out for 2 or 3 days, and then apply them on top of your garden beds. If you happen to be gardening on a sloped piece of land, then this might not be the best option because grass does have a tendency to mat because the rain can easily flow off of the surface of the mulch in those conditions. Next up is straw or hay. This is very easy to find at local garden centers, but you definitely want to be careful about the source of your straw or hay. Many of these are made for feeding horses, so they don't have to worry about herbicides being on the straw or hay. Herbicides don't break down over time, that's why they're called persistent herbicides. They last forever essentially, and they can really wreak havoc on your young seedlings. I've heard many disastrous tales of people ruining their garden by mulching with straw or hay, so make sure you get it from a reliable source that does not use herbicides. Straw can also contain seeds, so you'll find little shoots of grass coming up throughout the season. It sort of defeats the purpose of mulching. Now, we've used straw a lot in the past, but we're sort of moving away from it now, especially since we have access to fallen leaves every year. We're just going to be going that route instead and play it safe. If you do decide to go with straw or hay, you want to apply a pretty thick layer around 6 or 8 inches deep. Next up are wood chips, and this is another potentially free resource. Call around your local tree cutting service and see if they'll drop off a free load of hardwood chips. In a lot of cases, these companies have to pay to unload their chips elsewhere, so they'll be happy to drop them off at your house. This type of mulch breaks down nice and slowly, so it lasts a long time, and I think it's one of the more attractive. Next up is compost, and you may think of this as more of a soil amendment, but you can use it as a mulch, just having it sit on the surface of the soil. Compost is unique among this list because it contains lots of nutrients and will add an abundance of nutrition to your soil, increasing microbial life and overall improving the health of your soil. The only drawbacks are that if your compost isn't finished, it may smell a little bit and it might contain some weed seeds, so just keep that in mind. And lastly is plastic mulch, and I saved this for last because most people probably won't want to put plastic in their garden. But it certainly does have its use cases, and plastic mulch is one of the few mulches that can actually warm the soil. If you use black plastic mulch, the sun can actually heat up the soil by a few degrees, allowing you to plant a bit earlier. It also keeps the soil nice and warm for warm-loving plants like peppers or melons. The drawbacks are, of course, that plastic is not organic, it won't break down, it won't add nutrition to the soil, and it has to be removed every year. Now onto some tips for mulching peppers, and the first is when should you mulch? You want to mulch as soon as you create any new beds. So if you've added new soil to your raised bed or you've dug out a section of your lawn to create a new garden bed, you want to mulch right away or wait until you've transplanted your plants and then mulch around them. The benefits really start right away as soon as you mulch, so whenever you're watching this, if your beds are not mulched, now's a good time. The next tip is to remove the mulch whenever you want to apply any soil amendments or fertilizers. You don't want to sprinkle fertilizer on the top of your mulch. Instead, pull the mulch back and apply the fertilizer directly to the soil where it can be absorbed and used right away. Then simply replace the mulch back around your plants. Another time you might want to pull back the mulch is in early spring. By removing the mulch temporarily, you can actually warm up the soil a bit faster in the spring, allowing you to plant some of your veggies earlier than you normally would. Again, that mulch is providing insulation, so coming out of the winter, the soil is going to stay colder with mulch on top of it than if it didn't have mulch. Usually just a couple weeks of direct sun exposure is enough to warm up the soil. Another tip is to not work the mulch into the soil. It really should just be a blanket layer on the surface. You don't want to go digging it in or scratching it around because that can actually start to steal nitrogen from the soil as it starts to break down in that soil. Another tip is to avoid touching the mulch to the base of your plants, so you want to leave a couple inches around the base of your peppers if you can. This can help reduce chances of disease. And the last tip is to refresh your mulch on a regular basis. Like I said, most of these mulches will break down naturally over time, so you'll have to play it by ear and watch to see how broken down your mulch is and when you might need to apply more, usually every couple of years. If you want to take a deep dive and get better at growing peppers, check out our ebook, Growing Perfect Peppers. It's all about our entire process of growing pepper plants from seed to harvest, and we definitely talk about mulch in the book. Check out the link in the description below. Let me know if you have any tips for mulching your plants. What do you use to mulch your plants? We've got a lot of options, but it's always fun to hear what other people do. You may be wondering why this plant is not mulched, and the reason is that this is being transplanted into a larger container very soon, where it will have an application of mulch, just not yet. Thanks for watching Pepper Geek, and I'll see you next time.